I sided with his boss on an argument during work party, but he got furious, stood up and told me it's over.
Hello, Reddit. First time posting here, but I've been a regular lurker for years. Just, scrolling through stories and advice. Honestly, I never thought I'd be the one posting, but here I am. I'm actually using a throwaway account since a couple of my friends follow me, and I don't want them seeing this now because they warned me. My husband, David, and I had a massive disagreement recently, and now he's talking about divorcing me. I don't want that at all. I love him, but I feel like things have spiraled so far out of control, and I'm not sure how to fix it. He's furious, and while I understand why, I don't think this is worth ending our marriage over. So here I am, hoping some of you can help me figure out where to go from here. To give you some background, my name is Anna, and I'm 32. My husband, David, is also 32. We've been married for 5 years, but we've known each other since high school, so he's been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. We started dating shortly after graduation, and it's been us against the world ever since. For the most part, we've been that couple everyone else envies. The high school sweethearts who made it type. But of course, like any marriage, we're far from perfect. We've had our fair share of ups and downs. There have been arguments, rough patches, and misunderstandings, but we've always managed to come back together in the end. At least that's how it's been, until now. To be honest, the more I think about it now, I realize that everything started from my husband's new boss. David had just been assigned to work under him, and from the start, he wasn't thrilled. According to David, the boss was completely unqualified, a classic case of nepotism. Apparently, he only landed the role because he had close connections with the owner of the company, not because he'd earned it. The unfairness of it all made my husband resentful. Suddenly, he was saddled with extra work, not only doing his own job, but also picking up the slack for his boss. I could see the stress weighing on him, and I sympathized at first. I really did. But oddly enough, my frustration turned into curiosity. I found myself wanting to know more about this person who was not only incompetent, but actively making David's life miserable. The more David complained, the more curious I got. Who was this guy? What did he look like? What kind of person could get away with causing so much chaos just because he knew the right people? I felt annoyed for David's sake, but at the same time, I wanted to see him for myself. Maybe it was just morbid curiosity, but I had to see this infamous boss. Then I finally met him at a work party. And honestly, that's when things shifted for me. I expected someone sleazy or pathetic, someone I'd instantly dislike as much as David did. But he was nothing like that. Sure, he might have been incompetent and riding on connections, but he was undeniably charismatic, with this magnetic presence that was hard to ignore. He had that kind of charm that fills the room where it feels like you're the only person he's speaking to, even if there are a dozen people around. He was sharp, good-looking, and confident in a way that was almost intoxicating. I didn't want to feel that way, but before I knew it, I had a little crush. Just a harmless one, or so I thought. The problem is, I've never been the most subtle person. When I have a crush on someone, I don't hide it well. It just kind of leaks out in my words and actions. I started bringing up how amazing and successful David's boss was at home, not just once or twice, but almost constantly. I'd say things like, "You should try being more like your boss. He's got such a natural charisma and he always seems so composed." I could tell it bugged David, but I justified it to myself, thinking, well, he's lucky to work under someone like that. Then came the work events. Suddenly, any chance to see David's boss felt like an exciting opportunity. I'd go out of my way to look my best, even if it was just a casual office gathering. I'd dress up more than usual, putting extra effort into my appearance, as if I were going somewhere special. David noticed, of course. A few times he asked why I was getting so dressed up, but I brushed him off, saying I just wanted to make a good impression on his colleagues. I told him it was all for his sake, so people at his workplace would think highly of us. I didn't want to admit, even to myself, that it was more than that. David would come home tired, venting about his boss. Before, I'd be right there with him, supporting him, feeling the unfairness and frustration on his behalf. But that slowly changed. Eventually, whenever he'd complain, I'd find myself defending his boss. I didn't want to hear anything negative about him. Whether we were alone or around other people, I'd jump in to say David was overreacting or that his boss was a great guy who was only trying to do his job. I'd tell him he was lucky to work for someone like that, a comment that visibly hurt him. But I couldn't help myself. It felt instinctive, almost as if I had to protect and shield this man from criticism. Things only escalated from there. I started paying more attention to what his boss was doing than to David's own thoughts and feelings. When he'd talk about his day, I'd focus on every detail involving his boss rather than showing genuine interest in David's struggles. I'd ask about the boss's role, his input, even if David was clearly upset and just wanted support. To David, it must have seemed like I cared more about the boss than I did about him. I would make a point of spending extra time talking to his boss at every opportunity. It wasn't just small talk either. My body language was telling, even if I didn't fully realize it then. I'd be playful, leaning in closely whenever he spoke, hanging on to his every word as if he were saying something groundbreaking. I'd laugh at his little jokes, even the ones that weren't particularly funny, making sure he knew he had my full attention. I'd find reasons to touch him lightly here and there, like putting my hand on his arm during a conversation or brushing my fingers over his shoulder if I needed to get his attention. It was so subtle, but it was constant. You know, all those small things that girls do when they're interested in someone. It was all just happening naturally. In any social setting, I'd look for opportunities to engage with him. Sometimes I'd do it right in front of David and his coworkers. I'd act overly comfortable and familiar with his boss in ways that were probably inappropriate. I'd call him by his first name, even when everyone else was still calling him by his last name, and I'd make inside jokes that I had no business sharing. It was little things, like jokes we'd made during previous events that only he and I would understand. It probably seemed harmless to everyone around us, but I know it made David feel uncomfortable. And yet, I ignored that and kept doing it. The worst part, though, was how I'd ignored David entirely while doing all of this. It was like his presence faded whenever his boss was around. My focus was solely on what the boss was saying or doing, and I barely noticed David at all. If he tried to include me in a conversation or join in on a joke, I'd brush him off without a second thought. I'd act as though David wasn't even in the room, fully immersed in my own world with his boss. I'd let him fend for himself, even when I knew it hurt him because I was too caught up in my own fascination to care. It's hard to explain, but it was as if David didn't exist. It was as if I was in a bubble where only his boss existed, and everyone else faded into the background. I was so wrapped up in my attraction that I couldn't see how wrong it all was, or how hurtful it must have been for David to watch me behave like that. The thought of how I might have come across, especially in public, in front of his coworkers and friends, never crossed my mind. It was like I was spellbound and David was just an afterthought. I know what I was doing was wrong, but honestly, can you really blame me? Attraction isn't something you choose. It just happens. I didn't set out to be attracted to his boss. It was beyond my control. The more I tried to ignore it, the stronger it got. What started as a little crush, just a curiosity, turned into something I could barely keep hidden. I began obsessing over him, and it didn't feel like a problem, at least not my problem. It felt like I was justified somehow because I didn't ask for this. It all started innocently, or so I thought. I'd look up his boss on social media just to get a sense of who he was outside of work. But then I noticed myself engaging with his posts way more than any normal person should. I'd like every update, every photo, every milestone. I'd share his vacation pictures with David, gushing about how amazing his boss's life seemed. I'd swoon over his posts like he was some kind of celebrity, mentioning his achievements in conversation just as much as I mentioned my own husband's. I can only imagine how David felt seeing me act that way, but at the time, I didn't see anything wrong with it. In fact, anytime he even hinted that my behavior was a bit off, I'd laugh it off, saying I was just being friendly, as if my infatuation was totally harmless. Then, of course, it didn't stop at social media. I found excuses to contact his boss directly, even when there was no need. I started with a simple message request, just one little message, thinking nothing would come of it. But when he accepted, I felt this rush. It was like a door had opened. And before I knew it, I was sending him memes, sharing work-related ideas, even checking in on minor issues that really didn't require his attention. It became normal somehow. Casual, I'd tell myself. But I knew what I was doing. I just convinced myself that it was harmless. And soon it wasn't enough to just keep up with his posts or have small chats here and there. I wanted to know everything about him. His favorite food, his hobbies, his childhood stories, even tiny details that normal people wouldn't care about. I'd pester David with questions, constantly trying to pull more and more information out of him. Anything David didn't know, I'd just find out from our chats. I mean, if I was already talking to his boss on my own, then I might as well use that connection, right? It's honestly embarrassing to admit now, but at the time his boss's name probably came up more than David's. I'd weave him into daily conversations as if he were part of our lives, like he was someone I couldn't stop thinking about, which, if I'm honest, was exactly the case. I know I made David uncomfortable. I could see it in his face, his body language, but I brushed that off too. Told him he was overthinking it, that he was reading into things that weren't there. Look, I know it sounds like I'm making excuses, but it wasn't my fault. I couldn't control my feelings. Nobody can control their feelings. Is it really fair to judge me for that? Yes, okay, I can admit I wasn't the most thoughtful, but honestly, I wasn't doing anything wrong, or at least that's what I told myself. And if I'm being totally honest, I think what pushed David over the edge was how dismissive I became of his concerns. Whenever he tried to talk to me about how he felt, I'd shut him down. Every single time. If he said I was becoming too focused on his boss, I'd laugh and tell him he was overreacting. If he told me he was stressed about work, I'd wave him off, saying he needed to try harder, to push himself more, just like his boss did. Anytime he tried to vent, I'd counter by praising his boss, saying he was a natural leader who only wanted David to succeed, that David was making a big deal out of nothing. It was like I saw his boss as this flawless figure, a person who could do no wrong, and anyone who disagreed, especially David, was just being irrational. It must have been maddening for him, now that I think about it. There he was, trying to open up to me about his frustrations, about how unfair it felt for him at work, and all I did was minimize his feelings. In my eyes, his boss was like this incredible man, and David was just, well, David. I invalidated everything he said, made it seem like his feelings didn't matter, like he was making mountains out of molehills. He'd tell me how much his boss stressed him out, and I'd turn around and make him feel like he was the problem, not his boss. And yes, I know it's my fault. I should have been more understanding, more considerate of how David was feeling. But it wasn't really all my fault, was it? I mean, who can honestly control who they're attracted to? Feelings are feelings, and they're not something you can just turn off. Maybe it's selfish, and maybe people will judge me, but at the end of the day, I was just following my heart. And it's not like I was hurting anyone, right? Again, yes, I know it's my fault, but at the same time, can you really blame me? I can't control the way I feel, and I'm sorry that I ended up falling for someone else, but it's not like I planned any of this. And honestly, by this point, my feelings had gotten so strong that I just couldn't keep them in check. Then came the next work party, and well, things got out of hand. Looking back, I can admit I went overboard. I was practically putting his boss on a pedestal the entire night. Anytime the conversation shifted toward David or his achievements, I found some way to steer it back to his boss. I'd start praising him, flattering him, laughing way too loudly at his jokes. Honestly, probably a bit more than was appropriate. It was like I couldn't help myself. I was laser focused on him like a moth drawn to a flame. And yeah, I noticed David watching me the entire time. I could practically feel his eyes on me, his growing irritation, his disappointment. But I brushed it off, thinking he'd just address it later at home, and we'd talk it out in private. That's why I was so completely floored when he actually called me out in front of everyone. It happened during a group conversation, where David and his boss started disagreeing over some work-related issue. I don't even remember what they were arguing about, to be honest, because all I could think about was taking his boss's side. It just felt natural. Of course I'd support him. Maybe my enthusiasm was a bit over the top, and maybe, yes, I sided with him out of admiration rather than actually caring about the argument itself. But so what? I have a right to side with whoever I want to, right? Who cares if it's my husband's boss? But that was it for David. I think that for him, seeing me openly fawn over his boss while disagreeing with him was the final straw. He glared at me in disbelief, and I could feel the tension building. But I didn't expect what happened next. David, clearly furious, stood up, looked me dead in the eye, and in front of everyone, told me it was over. Just like that. I felt like someone had just slapped me across the face. My heart dropped. Here we were in a room full of his colleagues, friends, and his boss, and David decided this was the place to make a scene. I tried to brush it off, to act like he was just overreacting, as usual. I played it down, told him he was blowing things out of proportion, and suggested we talk about it privately later. I mean, sure, I might have gone a bit too far, but there was no need for him to make a public spectacle of it. All I wanted was for him to calm down, to pull him aside, and let him know he was making a big deal out of nothing. But he didn't budge. He stormed out, leaving me standing there, trying to keep my composure while everyone else just stared at me, shocked and awkward. Honestly, I was disappointed. I couldn't believe he'd actually do this in front of everyone, humiliating me like that. Sure, I know I was maybe a little out of line, but for him to react like that, to make such a big show of things, I didn't expect it. I never thought he'd actually say something in public, especially when we could have handled it privately. I mean, isn't that what married people are supposed to do? Handle things behind closed doors rather than make a scene in front of everyone? I don't know. Maybe he was just overreacting. Maybe he had a right to be upset, but either way, I didn't deserve that kind of public humiliation. David was my ride, so with him storming out, I was stranded at this party without a way home. And let me tell you, I was furious. I mean, sure, I could see he was mad at me, maybe more than he ever had been before, but did that really justify abandoning me there in front of everyone? I figured that yes, maybe I had gone a little overboard with his boss, and maybe siding with him so publicly hadn't been my best move, but this? Leaving me there, embarrassed and alone? It felt petty, like he was trying to teach me a lesson or punish me. Anyway, I stood around for a few minutes after he left, trying to save face. I thought maybe if I acted unfazed, people would move on, and it wouldn't be as awkward. But the silence was so heavy, and everyone was clearly avoiding eye contact with me. It was like they were all waiting for me to leave, hoping I would just disappear. So I decided to take the hint. I thought maybe his boss, of all people, would be willing to drop me off. I mean, I'd been so supportive of him the entire night, practically his biggest cheerleader. So I casually approached him, thinking it wouldn't be a big deal to ask him for a ride. But then he refused. Just flat out, unapologetically said he couldn't do it, without giving any real explanation. Honestly, it was a bit insulting. Here I'd been building him up all night, and the one time I needed something from him? Nothing. It was like he couldn't be bothered. I felt totally let down. So my next thought was to call an Uber, but of course that didn't go smoothly either. I kept getting cancellations, one after another, which only added to my frustration. After about 5 minutes of watching my app update with driver canceled, I gave up. There I was, stuck, feeling humiliated, and everyone else was either ignoring me or actively avoiding me. Finally, I started asking around, hoping one of David's coworkers or someone I knew would help me out. But one by one, they all came up with excuses. "Oh, sorry, I'm heading in the opposite direction," or "My car's already full," or even, "I don't think my spouse would be comfortable with it." They couldn't even make eye contact with me as they declined. It was like I had the plague. I mean, seriously? These were people I had mingled with at office events and small get-togethers, and now they were acting like I was a stranger. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, someone finally agreed to give me a lift. I had to ask half the room before I found one willing person. It wasn't enough for David to embarrass me in front of everyone at that party. No, he had to take it even further when I got home. Honestly, I'd thought that once we were back in private, the whole thing would blow over. I figured we'd have a tense conversation, I'd apologize, maybe a few hurt feelings, but nothing that couldn't be fixed. So I went into it fully expecting it to be manageable. I told him I was sorry if he felt hurt or embarrassed, that maybe he was overreacting a bit, that I didn't mean for things to go the way they did. I genuinely tried to smooth things over, to get him to see that it wasn't as big of a deal as he was making it out to be. But then he completely blew up. He didn't just disagree, he went off in a way I'd never seen before. He was yelling, fuming, pacing the room like he couldn't stand to even look at me. It was brutal, one of the worst arguments we've ever had, and he kept going on and on about betrayal, disrespect, and how he couldn't believe I'd put him through this. It was exhausting. And then he did the unthinkable. He kicked me out in the middle of the night. I thought he was kidding at first. I even laughed, thinking he'd cool down and realize how absurd he was being. But he wasn't joking. He was dead serious. I tried to reason with him, calm him down, but he was done listening. He said I couldn't take the car because apparently he paid for it, so technically it was his. Fine, whatever. I called an Uber thinking I'd just leave and come back the next day after he had some time to chill out. I figured he'd cool off and we'd talk then, but things only went downhill from there. I went to my parents' house thinking I'd have a place to stay, at least for the night, but when I got there, they wouldn't even let me in. David had already called them, and to make it worse, he told them I'd been cheating on him, not even a mention of the fact that it was, at worst, an emotional affair. And of course my parents, staunch Christians and devout Catholics who see divorce and cheating as some unforgivable sin, took his side immediately. They wouldn't even hear me out. They told me I should go back to David, work it out, settle things like adults. As if that was an option. I was so livid, so utterly betrayed. Here I was, alone, humiliated, and now even my own parents were against me. With nowhere else to go, I ended up calling my best friend, who thankfully let me crash at her place. I spent that first night tossing and turning, unable to believe that things had spiraled this far out of control. And then the next day, I had to explain the whole mess to my friend, who was shocked at how much I had apparently fucked things up. But thankfully, she's been understanding, letting me stay with her and trying to keep me sane. But I'm at a complete loss here. David won't let me back in the house. My parents refuse to let me stay with them, saying I need to fix things with David. I feel like I'm completely alone in this, like no one understands my side of things. I get that I crossed some lines, but I never thought it would come to this. It's infuriating and humiliating, and I just needed a place to vent, to be honest. If anyone has any advice on how to get through to David, I'm all ears. I'm honestly considering reaching out to his boss for help, but I don't know if that would make things worse. At this point, I just want things to go back to normal, for David to see that this isn't worth blowing our whole marriage over. Please, if anyone has suggestions, I'm desperate for anything that might help. Update. Hello, Reddit. So first things first, I didn't come here to be dragged. I posted here because I needed advice, maybe a little empathy, not this barrage of insults telling me how selfish or out of touch I am. I am not a narcissist. I am not some selfish person who doesn't care about her husband's feelings. I came here as a sane, self-aware adult looking for support and insight. Yes, I understand that I played a part in this. I even said in my post that I know I did things wrong. But I am tired of people acting like this is all my fault. David overreacted. He's always been overly emotional and quick to anger. So honestly, none of this should be surprising. And as for the advice, don't even get me started. People telling me to lawyer up or grant forgiveness or to let David go through with the divorce. It was a waste of my time. If anything, these responses only made things worse. And I guess you'll all be happy to know that your relentless negativity and finger-pointing worked out exactly as you wanted, because guess what? Somehow my friend stumbled across this post and sent it around. It didn't matter that I used a throwaway account, people still found it, and one of them actually forwarded it to me with a note about how this sounds familiar. I was mortified. I begged them not to show David, to just let me deal with this on my own terms. But did they listen? No, of course not. They went right ahead and forwarded it to him. And the next thing I knew, David was asking me directly if I'd been the one to post it. I tried to deny it. I mean, what else could I do? But it was pointless. I hadn't even bothered to change many details beyond our names, so he figured it out almost immediately. Then he told me something I didn't see coming. He said he'd been considering working things out with me, that he'd been willing to try couples counseling or therapy. He'd been open to the idea of us. But after reading the comments on this post and the things I said, he had a change of heart. He said he realized that maybe some things can't be fixed, that some levels of disrespect are just impossible to overlook. He told me we're getting divorced, and he'll be contacting his lawyer to start the process, and he was so cold about it. He said that from here on, any communication between us would be through his lawyer. It was like talking to a stranger, and it felt like someone had punched me in the gut. He went on to say that reading through the post made him see me in a new light, one he didn't like. He even said that I came off as a narcissist, that I never once showed any real remorse, that I was always trying to minimize my actions and blame everything on him. He pointed out that not once in my post did I take full responsibility or talk about how deeply sorry I was, and he called that selfish and self-centered. And then he dropped the final bombshell. He told me that he didn't even know if he ever really knew me, that maybe he'd just been too blinded by love to see who I really was. Or maybe, he said, I just changed, and this wasn't the woman he'd married. Hearing that, I can't even describe it. It felt like my entire world was crumbling around me. All I could think was, how did we even get here? So there you have it, Reddit. My marriage in tatters, thanks to people who decided to judge and condemn me without understanding the whole story. I came here for help, for advice, for a safe, anonymous space to vent, and instead you all just tore into me. And now my husband is filing for divorce. So yeah, thanks for that. Thanks a lot. Update. Hello, Reddit. So, a lot of you have been tagging me asking for an update. I don't even know why I'm doing this. I mean, you guys don't really deserve it after how you treated me, but maybe I just need a place to rant. It's honestly a mess, so here goes. What does it matter now, anyway? My so-called friends already found this account and probably won't stop snooping here. So, yeah, I know they're going to see this and gossip. But honestly, screw you all. I never liked most of you, and you were always more David's friends than mine. You can keep checking in, keep judging, whatever. Anyway, here's the update. It's not exactly great news. I'm no longer at my friend's place because, big surprise, she turned out to be just as fake as the rest of them. She kicked me out. She claimed it was too much strain on her mental health, but honestly, she just couldn't handle being a real friend when I actually needed one. I had nowhere else to go, so now I'm staying with my aunt. And let me tell you, it's been humiliating. I've basically become an unpaid housekeeper. She's got me doing all the cleaning, cooking, and even babysitting her kids just so I can have a place to sleep. She didn't even hesitate to take advantage of my situation. And the worst part? She acts like she's doing me some massive favor. I hate it here, but I don't have any other choice. I've got barely any money left since David took 80% of what was in our joint account, just like that. I know he has a right to some of it, but that much? It feels like he's just punishing me. So yeah, I'm stuck here. It's honestly infuriating. I feel insulted, humiliated, and just completely defeated by all of this. I've tried to reach out to my friends. I've tried to reach out to David multiple times just to talk, but he won't respond at all. He hasn't blocked me, but he just flat out ignores every message. Ever since his lawyer served me, it's like I don't even exist to him. All he says is that I'm supposed to go through his lawyer for anything, but honestly, that just makes everything feel colder and even worse. And don't even get me started on my parents. They're devastated that I'm getting a divorce. They're so caught up in their whole perfect family image that they're talking about cutting me off entirely, like I'm some kind of disappointment to them. I mean, I get that they're upset, but this is my life, not theirs. And now, the one time I actually need their support, they're pulling away too. All because they can't handle a little bit of mess in their image. It's unreal. I don't even know what to do at this point. It's like my whole world's turned upside down and everyone's just pointing fingers or closing doors on me. Thanks, Reddit, for giving me a place to vent. But I'll be honest, I didn't sign up for all this judgment and condemnation, and I still don't believe that I'm entirely at fault here. So, there's your update. Not like any of you care. Update. Hey, Reddit. So yeah, I'm here with another update. Not that any of you deserve it, but whatever. I keep getting messages and nasty comments, people saying horrible things in my DMs. To all of you sending me hateful messages, seriously, get a life. I'm convinced more than half of Reddit is just a bunch of losers with no actual social lives, which explains why you're all so judgmental and weird. I can't believe I made the mistake of posting about this mess in the first place. Maybe if I hadn't, things wouldn't have spiraled this far. But here we are, so let me just give you all the update you apparently want so badly. First off, the divorce has been finalized. Yep, it's officially over, and honestly, I don't know how I feel about it. It was so cut and dry, which is just insulting. After all this time together, he had no problem letting it all go. And as expected, I barely got anything out of it. No house, no car, no spousal support, nothing. The car was apparently in his name, and he'd been the one making payments, so that's that. Honestly, it's so infuriating how he's acted like I'm the one who's done him wrong and doesn't deserve anything. Anyway, fine, whatever, it's done. Let him live with his choices. I know he's going to regret this. Maybe it'll hit him in a few months or even a few years, but he's going to realize that he messed up. And when that time comes and he comes crawling back, I won't be there to take him back. He's an emotional idiot, and I wasted way too much time on him. So yeah, congrats, David. I hope you're proud of yourself. As for me, let's just say things aren't exactly peachy. I'm staying at a homeless shelter now. Yeah, laugh it up. I know people are going to call it karma or whatever, and I've read the comments. But who knows? Maybe this is just the storm before the calm. I'm still holding out that things will turn around, and when they do, I'll be sure to update you all. Oh, and if you're wondering how I got here, my aunt kicked me out. She accused me of stealing money. I mean, I borrowed it, and I was planning to put it back before she even noticed, but she freaked out and threw me out. Not that I care, she was insufferable and her husband was a total sleazebag. I didn't like staying there anyway, so whatever. Here I am at the shelter, and while it's not exactly great, I can handle it. I'm going to start job hunting soon and see if I can figure something out. Worst case, I end up on the streets, but I don't see it as that big a deal. And just to top it all off, my parents have completely disowned me. Cut me off, won't even talk to me. It's honestly ridiculous. But if they're not going to be useful to me, then what's the point of keeping them around anyway? They were never supportive, so I'm better off without them. So, yeah, there's your update. I know my so-called friends are probably loving this, watching from the sidelines like vultures. You were never my real friends anyway, just a bunch of David's nerdy little followers. So go ahead, have a good laugh. Enjoy it while it lasts, because I'll be back on my feet soon enough.
I never thought I'd run to Reddit for advice, but here I am. I don't know the next step to take right now. My husband found out about my secret affair, and then he set a trap for me and my app. My husband, Vikram, funny 40, is the definition of an alpha male husband. He's a successful man who likes to be in charge. He never likes to lose control of a situation. So when he found out I was cheating on him, he found a way to make me regret it. And my husband and I, Kamal, 32, have been married for the past 10 years. We have 2 children together, a 5-year-old girl and a 7-year-old boy. I know a lot of people will feel the need to judge me for cheating on my husband when I have a complete family, but I have never really felt complete in my marriage. Marriage is supposed to make one feel complete, happy, and content, but I have never really experienced any of these things with my husband. Happiness became a strange feeling to me almost every day. The only light I was fortunate to see was the birth of my 2 children who completed me in a way, but even that too wasn't enough. When my children go to school, I'm welcomed by that feeling of emptiness all over again. It's not helped that the husband I married does not even notice that. He's a perfectionist who's focused on being at the top and keeping his 6 figures constant. I needed more, so I had to search elsewhere. It was a decision that took a lot of courage and self-doubt, but I had to do it for myself. What I never expected was the consequences that followed. I am a mixed woman from Mumbai, India. My mother is from Canada while my father is from India. Growing up with both ethnicities was a little bit of trouble for me. On one hand, I had my strict father who restricted almost all my activities, and on the other hand, I had my strict mother who did not want to restrict my activities just to spite my father. Yes. I practically grew up in a broken home with barely any love and attention. I grew up doing stupid things just to see if my mother would look into my eyes and tell me how much she cared for me. None of that ever happened. My father, he practically ignored my existence every single day. When I was old enough to get married, my father insisted that he would arrange my marriage for me. I did not want that. I just wanted to go to college, a place far away from my parents, then get my freedom and fall in love with a man I actually like. But none of those desires came true. I was to do exactly what my parents wanted me to do. I could not run away. They would have found me. My father worked at an airport. Of course, he had connections. How would I board a flight and not be seen? I had been desperate to get away, but I was not stupid. I ran to my mother for help, but she told me there was nothing she could do. The first and only time my mother was not ready to fight my father was when I needed her to fight him the most. She turned her back on me and did not look back. The first meeting with Vikram and his family was one of the most depressing moments of my life. Even though I knew I was getting into an arranged marriage, I still expected my husband to show me some sort of friendliness. Instead, Vikram was guarded. He did not even try to impress me. Yeah, I was dressed up extravagantly and forced to take etiquette classes so I could make an impression. 2 more meetings later, my marriage with Vikram was finalized. I had no say in it. I could not even choose the color I wanted to wear on my own wedding day. The man I was meant to marry had not even spoken a single word to me before our marriage. Like I felt suffocated because I began to feel like I didn't truly deserve to be happy. I always thought my marriage would make up for all the happiness I lacked as a child. Vikram was good looking and wealthy, but none of that really mattered to me. I wanted to know who he was inside. I wanted to connect with my husband on an emotional level, but Vikram did not look like someone who was ready for that on our wedding day. My parents pulled me to the side and warned me not to do anything to ruin the wedding. They were afraid I'd change my mind and run away. I felt like laughing at that very moment. I thought they wanted to at least hug me and tell me how much they'll miss me. Even if it was a lie, I wanted to hear them say it. None of that happened. All I got was threats and unnecessary talks about being a dutiful wife. After the wedding, I was told that Vikram and I were going to move to Australia. Yes, I was only informed after the marriage. No one told me I'd be moving before the wedding. Maybe they thought it wasn't important since my opinion would not matter anyway. And my wedding was horrible. My wedding night had to be miserable. I was a virgin. Yes, I was a very shy virgin who hadn't even kissed a boy's cheek before. I did not know what to expect that night. So I was a nervous mess. When Vikram and I got to our hotel room, he just turned off the lights and went to sleep. No, I did not feel relieved. I felt stuck. It's not because he did not touch me. I didn't even know anything about sex back then. What hurt me was the fact that the man I married could not even start a conversation with me. I tried talking to him on our way to the hotel that night, but I could just tell that his replies were forced and uninterested. He did not even tell me good night before he laid down on the bed and fell asleep that night. As a girl who was already quite damaged, I felt like I had made the biggest decision of my life by marrying a stranger. Do you know what the worst part was? It was not even my decision at all. My parents chose him for me. When Vikram and I moved to Australia, I tried to start a new life there. Even though I was quite disappointed in the husband I got, I was determined to make our marriage work. I tried starting conversations with him, making jokes, and even disturbing him while he was busy working. So this worked for a while, and he warmed up to me a little. When I say he warmed up, I meant in his own little way. He would answer my questions, laugh at my jokes, and lean into my touches with time. We were friendly enough to start sleeping together. That was how I got my 2 wonderful children. Vikram and I would have sex 3 times a week or more if we wanted. We'd also talk about random things and joke with each other, but that was it. He was no longer a stranger physically and mentally, but emotionally he was. For many months, I felt like I was greedy for not feeling complete. I felt like he was trying his best to warm up to me, yet I was the one who wasn't satisfied. I actually felt guilty for not being happy. It's something I struggled with internally for a long time. I actually began to hate myself because I was a housewife who just stayed home and awaited her husband's return just so she could feel validated. I saw my daughter and son brought some light into my life when they were born. Their births were 2 years apart, but they play like twins. I love them with every single vein in me. They stopped my emotional problems for a while, but even that was temporary. When they were old enough to go to school, my loneliness came back. I would dwell in my sad thoughts for hours before they returned. What I struggled most with was understanding what love meant. I grew up without love, so I could never really understand what it was or recognize when I was at the receiving end of it. For a long time, I thought my husband loved me and I loved him too, but one day I realized that all we had was an understanding that we were stuck together for life. So we better not make each other's life difficult. That was when I made my decision. I took the first independent step of my whole life 2 years ago when my husband came back from work, and I told him I wanted to start going to college. He was surprised at my request and did not even take me seriously until I told him the same thing 2 days later. At first, he tried to talk me out of it and talk about how the children needed me, but I told him the children had school and extra lessons. He told me that he earned enough to take us a lifetime, so I should not bother getting into college. He insisted that college was important for me, and it was not about getting a career to make money. After a lot of deliberation and a series of phone calls, yes, he called my parents and his parents to ask for permission. I was finally allowed to start college. When I started college, a part of me felt light and happy. I was already 30 then, but I did not care. I now had something to look forward to every day. I made new friends and learned to laugh a little. College felt like a place to spread my wings and fly as high as I wanted. One day after classes, a guy named Freed, 1828, offered to give me a lift. I politely declined because I already had a car that was designated to drive me home, but Fred was not ready to take no for an answer. He got out of his car and practically begged me to let him give me a ride. I found the situation funny and ridiculous, so I declined once again and left in my designated car. From that day, Fred kept offering me a ride home. At some point, after 2 weeks, I sent my car back and gave in. Feed was so happy. There had been a huge smile on his face. We chatted during the ride home and honestly felt nice to meet someone new. Fred drove me home. The weeks that followed after that, it was not a problem because Vikram was not usually home till 9 p.m. in the night. I closed from college at 5 p.m. Fred and I became friends after 1 month of getting to know each other. It felt nice to have a friend, someone to talk to, and someone who actually wanted to know you without a reason behind it. I could tell that there was a physical attraction between us, but I tried to brush it off because I was still very married to Vikram. I really did, but for a woman who had been deprived of real love all her life, my resistance was not strong enough. One day, Fred and I kissed in this car. From that day on, we exchanged kisses in the car, from kisses to tight hugs, then smooching on day sex. The day it happened, I'd been so shocked that I did not move for a long time. Yes, it happened in his car. It was at that moment I realized I really didn't love my husband, because after it happened, I did not feel any form of regret or shame. I felt liberated and full. I liked it so much I was not afraid to do it again. Fine. It's not something I'm ashamed of saying because I deserve to be happy. I deserve to live a content life. Fred and I continued our secret relationship for 1 more year. I told him I was married long before we got intimate, but he didn't really care. He was okay with the secret moments we shared. Began to smile more and live life more purposefully thanks to Fred, but one day it all broke into pieces. On this fateful day, my designated driver came to pick me up. It was an unusual occurrence because I had asked him to stop coming since I usually went home with Fred. The driver insisted and told me he had to drive me home that day. Fred had invited me to his house, so I did not want to disappoint him. I refused to follow my driver and went to Fred's house. My husband was on a business trip and my kids were at Vikram's sister's place, so I did not plan on going back home. Fred cooked dinner for both of us, lit candles, and played some very nice music. It felt like I was in a dream, and to be honest, I didn't really want to wake up. I felt genuinely happy after a long time. I liked the feeling of content I had in that moment. I shared with Fred. I knew what I was doing was wrong, but everything that happened to me in my life had been wrong. I wanted to be selfish for once in my life. I wanted to choose myself, and I did just that. I had a passionate night with a man that was not my husband. The next morning, I woke up in Fred's t-shirt. I was thirsty and went to grab some water to drink from the kitchen. I remember hearing a knock on the door. And when I opened the door, I was shocked to see Vikram standing there. He looked like he could kill me at that moment. I was too shocked to move or say a word. I could see the anger in his eyes that day. The way he glared at me and pushed me out of the way. Fred ran downstairs to see what was happening, and that was when he met Vikram. Vikram punched Fred till he was bleeding. I had been so scared that I started to scream. I got the shock of my life when I saw my designated driver at the door with 2 policemen. That was when everything seemed to make sense. I realized that Vikram must have noticed that I no longer used my designated driver, so started to keep an eye on me. He lied that he was going on a business trip. He just wanted to follow me and catch me red-handed. The driver had followed Fred's car the night before and told Vikram the address. It was a trap. Vikram found out I was cheating on him, so he set a trap for me and Fred. Vikram always wanted to be in control no matter what. I cheated and got out of his control, so he wanted to catch me in the act his own way. I thought that was all, but Vikram had me and Fred arrested. I know some of you might wonder who gets arrested for cheating. Well, Fred and I got arrested, but it was not for cheating. The police found drugs in Fred's garden and in his car, so we were arrested for the illegal possession of drugs. Of course, it was all framed by Vikram. Fred had a heart condition and could not even smoke. How did drugs suddenly appears? And then Vikram was right there to notice it. Our explanations fell on deaf ears and we were detained for 3 days. It was Fred's friend that got us out on bail. That was 2 months ago. Vikram sent me packing and I was served with divorce papers immediately. The only thing I'm worried about now is my children. They mean a lot to me. I don't want Vikram to get full custody in court. What should I do? Should I beg him to take me back for the sake of my children? Please help me. Update. So it's been a year. And I decided to add an update since a lot of people read my story. Fred and I are still together. I live with him. I'm still in college trying to finish up and get a job. Fred has been helpful and he's been taking good care of me. Vikram tried his best to get full custody of our children. He even used his wealth, but the court concluded that the children needed me in their lives. We now co-parent cordially and try to maintain a civil relationship for our children. My parents called me just to disown me over the phone when they found out what happened, but I didn't really care. They were never really loving parents to begin with. The first few months after getting caught were horrible, but I took each day seriously and fought my way out. My life is not perfect, but at least for the first time in my whole existence, I chose myself. That's all that matters to me. I now understand what care and love means. I'd rather live a fulfilled life with nothing than an empty one with everything. I lost my wealthy husband, but I got my peace and happiness, which is priceless. I hope my journey to freedom inspires someone else. The journey ends here, guys. Goodbye.